reporting it to them. All right, we're recording, which means this will be when your permanent records.
Yeah, that was a lot of permanent record.
Did I ever tell you this story? I told you, John, because you're a teacher, but this John. But my first week teaching sixth grade in Baltimore City, I finally got the nerve up to ask my principal where the permanent records were. Because of course I was told quite frequently that things that I did would make it on my permanent record. So I wanted to know, so I could do my administrative. Of course, you know, once she picked herself up off the floor from laughing, she assured me that that was not necessarily the thing.
I was told that many times.
No, unfortunately, we had permanent records as well as teachers.
No, that's good to the teachers. There you go.
Right up there with all your original sins.
That's right.
No record.
No record of any of them. Right. I will just because I'm.
John.
All right, everybody. So welcome to night 2 of our 6-week encounter, our brush with the scriptures, and we're here to remind and equip one another to not take the Bible literally, but to take it seriously. That's right. That's right. So we are here to read through the many different strains of tradition and thought that have created this thing that we call the Bible, and to see what we can, first, if we can make sense of what it's saying as far as the literature of the time, and then see what we can make sense out of it for ourselves, and most importantly, see if we can notice the changing mind of God in all of this. All right, so fellow CMOGers, changing mind of God. For some reason, I really love saying CMOG. That would drive someone crazy. Okay, yes. It's someone else I'm going to be closer to. I'm driving crazy with it probably. Which is just part of domestic tranquility.
And one of the many pleasures.
Right. And so let's just go around quickly and just make sure you're not speaking. You keep yourself muted in case someone comes running into your room where you've got your Zoom on with crash symbols or
Jerry Tubin.
Or what?
Like Jerry Tubin.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Or other interesting things that may or may not be appropriate for such an encounter. Yeah, so here we go. I'm just going to model. We're just going to share name pronouns and just one little thing you want us to know, something you want to share because you're touched by it briefly, or sadness or a joy. I am Reverend Scott Heatham, and it is a pleasure beyond measure to be here with you, the newest members of the Academy.
Oh, I am Intern Sabrina. My pronouns are they, them, and I look forward to this class so much. So that's the thing that you'd be doing right now.
I'm John. My pronouns are they, them, and I would love to use this opportunity to double say that my pronouns are they, them, because on Sabrina's Trans Day of Remembrance themed sermon, I was misgendered more than I've ever been here, which felt weird. And so I would love to call everybody in. Because it's been like a year now, and I'm listening to folks still having a little bit of time. So this is my way of taking that space and asking for that if everybody doesn't mind.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
I'm Syl Knudsen, she, her, hers, and I am just pumped to be here and see what revelations occur.
Woo! I'm Susan Spanier, don't know which way to look.
Yes, wherever.
Well, I've been a member for 56 years. And I hope to learn a lot about, and I've been coming to the church for 57 years, so. thought we had joined, but we hadn't. We just signed the guest book. So it was a year after.
Hmm.
And the reason I'm here is to learn more about the Bible, since I haven't studied it since, except for Reverend Scott's class
Thank you.
on women's.
Awesome. Thanks. Oh, yeah. Yeah, how to reading the women of the Bible. Yeah, that was a great class. Thank you, Sue. Maddie?
Hello, I'm Maddie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am also just really happy to be here. Get to know this church more. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. Welcome. I'm going to jump to the screen. So I'm just going to call folks out. Jerry Boucher, go first, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jerry Boucher, he, him. I'm glad to be here with, 20 other independent thinkers. I guess to say maybe one or two things. I did attend Princeton Theological Seminary. I did finish, but I've been a ESL English and German teacher for 31 years, and now I'm retired.
And you have a fuzzy theologian on your lap, I see.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah, she's very affectionate. This is Bella.
All right, awesome. Val Porter.
Okay, so Valerie Porter, she, her, hers. I've been coming to the U now about 3 years, and I love it, and I love Rev Scott. And I think I told you I was so impressed with your breadth of knowledge last week. I wasn't raised with any religious education at all, so that's the reason that I'm taking this class. So thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, Val. Sylvia.
I'm Sylvia, she, her, and I am very curious to learn some more about how to read about the wrath of God in this familiar but unfamiliar Noah story that I haven't read in a very long time.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Sylvia. Wendy.
Okay, I'm Wendy, she, her, and hers. And I love reading the Bible, and I'm just so pleased that we're having this class. And there's so many people. And just one thing, for about 10 minutes, I'll have to be away, but I'll come back. So don't take offense when I chime off for a bit. So, but thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to being in this class.
Welcome. Carol, share that Chris and Deb. So Carol first.
Hi, I'm Carol McGough, and to repeat a bit of what Jerry just said about 20 independent thinkers, I can't think of any more interesting ways than to learn about something that I know a fair amount about, but with 20 independent UU thinkers, just as last week and the next several weeks, there'll be something brand new every minute, and I'm taking copious notes, so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Share.
You want me?
Share, yeah.
Foxy.
Foxy, yes.
I'm Foxy Pullen from Columbus, Ohio. She, her, hers. And I've been studying the Bible since I was probably 3. It was read at the breakfast table every morning. Daddy is a preacher, was a preacher. He passed a few years back. I'm here because I have insights that some of the others may not have, both in my religious studies and the fact that I am deeply involved in Middle Eastern anthropology.
Awesome. All right, Chris and then Deb.
Chris Corbett, he, him, his. I'm just happy to be here with this great group on a beautiful spring day.
And I'm Deb Corbett, she, her. And Wendy, you were making me smile because that's where I first met you in one of Rev Scott's RE classes. And while I think you and I have very different backgrounds with exposure to the Bible, I too love to open it up and get to read the original text. So I'll leave it with that.
So, welcome, Susan Pata and Salos, how I say that?
Kalos.
Yes.
Hi, I'm
Susan.
Susan Pata. You asked about being grateful. Believe it or not, grateful for COVID because I was going to have a scheduling conflict and not able to make the class. But who knew 3 years ago this whole thing of Zoom? So grateful that it gave us these skills and apps that we did not have prior. So gives me the ability to do things I might not have been able to do 3 years ago. So I'm looking forward to the class.
You're muted, Kevin. Looks like we need to come back.
I'll give you a moment. Diane Speck, just say hello to the people, pronouns, and what the one thing we should know today about you.
Once again, I can't wait to hear what you're going to talk about.
Oh, look at that. And Paula Juliana, if you'd like to say hello. Or if you got babies, if you're balancing babies and dinner, that's fine too.
Hi, everyone. Yes, that's what we're doing, but we are here and excited to be here.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Did we ever have a chance to connect with Kevin? It sounds like not, so we'll just wait till next time, and that's fine. So here we are, and
Do that there.
oh, Randy and Natasha.
On your right
Sorry,
side.
and John Wynick, sorry.
On your right side.
That whole side.
Your
That
right
whole
side,
thing.
you're missing.
That's exactly what you're here for. So go ahead, Randy. That's right.
I have an idea. I'm volunteering. I feel like we are the backbenchers in the sense that
Oh, wonderful.
we're Randy and Natasha Chase, and we live in Harrington Park, which is north of here. So driving at 6 p.m. towards the second side on the Garden State Parkway, we may be on the Zoom next time. Just
All right, yeah.
But I also feel we'll always come late and we'll always sit at the back bench, which reminds me of Fraser and Niles taking an auto class for auto mechanics. I don't know.
I don't remember that one. I'm getting all right. Cool. Thank you for that. And so sorry. I mean, I really can't see out of my right eye, but I don't normally disregard everything in the right side. But
Hi, I'm John, he, him. And I'm just happy that I'm here in person and not struggling with a Zoom mic this time.
Awesome. And to John next to you.
I'm John, he, him, his. And I am new to the congregation and just be delighted to be here to get to know more about this topic and meet more people. Thanks.
I'm Lauren Carlton, she, her, hers, and I feel like I'm getting older, I'm losing words in my head, and so I'm trying to take classes in a lot of things. You know, I'm learning sign, and this is a good experience for me. And plus, I really like to get to know more people in this community.
Great, awesome, John.
John Carlton, just happy to be here with like-minded people and always interested in what's rattling around in Rev Scott's brain at these times. And he, him, his.
Vivian, she, her, any day museums of the day, so I'm very happy to be here all day long. I got a blog written, so it'll be up soon, probably tonight. And I'm back to War Fest Bible, so it's there was next, right?
Diane,
No,
I call Diane already.
Okay,
It's okay.
stop forgetting.
It's quite all
Okay,
right.
I'm Mary Jones. You forgot me over here. And I think you did that on purpose. Right, Foxy? Anyhow, if you see me struggling, it's because I'm competing with these two. I don't know if you can see them.
Oh, yes.
The two
Another
of them,
fuzzy.
yeah, they just started going for competing with you. They want my attention because I'm with you.
All right, that's just fine with me.
Evan, the mic was muted by host. Oh, yeah, I'm muted. I like one. I can't read it.
Okay. Right now, Kevin. And it's
All
not
right,
just.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, Kevin. That's my fault.
Well, I'm just glad to be here. I'm not really certain what I'm doing here. I'm just glad to be here. I'm just getting into the group. I was invited by Foxy, and I know her as Otter. I guess you guys know her as someone else.
He has no
And
dog.
Reverend and the Reverend.
And you're joining us from where?
Texas.
There we go. All right. We're nationwide. That would say. Who thought you'd hear a ZZ Top reference in the Bible class?
Where
All
in
right.
Texas? I'm just curious, where in Texas?
About an hour south of Houston.
Yeah, well,
Oh, there's a lot south. How far south? But, I mean, where's the town?
I live in a small town called Brazoria, which is real close to Lake Jackson. I live approximately 30 minutes from the ocean, from the coast.
Cool.
I used to live in Houston, so I know Brazoria.
Okay.
It's just like a homecoming. You never met. Isn't that one? All right, well, talking about homecomings, let's get back into the Bible. So last week we spent some time on the creation stories, the two creation stories in the first 3+ chapters of the Bible. And today we're going to pick up and we're going to stay in Genesis all of this class for the most part. And so we won't always be so linear, but we are going to do that today. So after what we looked at last time, we looked at the Garden of Eden narrative, and then we have the Cain and Abel story, and then we have the first sets of begats, which come in chapter 5 of Genesis, and they really talk about, and this what this is doing is it's setting up the birth of Noah. And so we get to chapter 6 in Genesis, when the text is setting the stage for why a flood comes. And, you know, this New Revised Standard Version translation, you know, has the subtitle of 6, The Wickedness of Humankind. And so it says in 6:3, the Lord says, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh, their days shall be 120 years. This is the belief that there was, God places a limit on how long human beings can live. If you read the begats closely, some of these folks live almost 1,000 years. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about why all that is, because we're looking at something a little different here. So, but we have an interesting term that comes up in this part of the Bible. And so, and this relates back to something one of us looked at. I think it was Dr. Mary Jones who pointed us to Genesis 1:24, when it says, God says, and then it says the gods in plural, right? And so we were trying to figure out, why is there more than one of them?
We supposed to be at a specific spot?
And so in Genesis 1:26, the phrase is translated into English because it's plural in the original, let us make humankind in our image. Well, in Genesis 6, we have the emergence of the Nephilim, which are these sort of nebulous divine beings. And so in Genesis 6, verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans who bore children to them. And these were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. Does anyone have any idea how to explain any of this?
I don't know how to explain it, but this caught my attention in so many ways. You have us, you have the sons of the gods, which means there has to be a goddess up there somewhere to have a son to begin with. Who are mating with
breath, right? So
And eat
male and female.
More dirt.
So then they mate with humans to form these heroes, these giants, which God says, you know, they're part mortal. My grandkids here are part mortal. So I'm going to take the spirit away from them. They're going to die. Be aware of that, Mike. And what strikes me here is that in Greek mythology, Zeus created mankind 5 times. And the first ones were giants in the golden age. And each age afterwards, they demoralized until you got to us, the Iron Age, and we're the worst people around. And the Jans have a similar 4-stage creation of beings and wiping them out, and beings and wiping them out, and each one gets more degenerate. And the first ones are always godlike, closer to God, and here it's the grandsons of God, and they are giants. And I found that very, and then God jumps from that into, I don't know why, into I'm going to annihilate everybody because they're evil.
All right, let's talk about some of that history. Thanks for some of that background. There seems to be common threads throughout the ancient Near East, and Greece isn't that far from there. And Greece had their own stories of heroic ages and great heroes and demigods.
And they wrote the first 7 books of the Bible.
And you know, great. And so a lot of these books, you know, they're encountering Greek culture already, most likely. When the second exile ends, Greek culture is just starting to flourish and spread. This is like 500 some years before the Common Era, 526, I think it is. And they, and so they're, of course, they're encountering different ideas, and they were people who had been in exile. So a lot of what we read as this ancient Hebrew scripture is several sources being put together by a priestly class to try and set the record straight of what the religion is now that we're back in Jerusalem, now that we've been returned to our homeland. And so that's why a lot of these traditions collide. And it seemed like the earliest editors were okay leaving some of these vestiges of things that seem unexplainable in it. They didn't feel they needed to make everything completely tight. Because they really don't explain this heavenly court much. Once you get past Genesis, and actually the earlier part of Genesis, you're not going to hear much of anything of this heavenly court and these other divine beings. You'll hear some talk of angels perhaps in the Psalms, but the Nephilim and the giants, and you're not going to hear about this ever again, you know, for the most part in the rest of the Hebrew scripture. So what that tells us is that, if anything, that helps us maybe locate sources from which they were borrowing from or reacting against. And of course, a lot of the religions around them told these colorful stories of gods who were super jealous and meddled in human affairs. And we talked a little bit about that last week. So let's let's just assume and take the editor at his, I'm going to assume it was a he, considering that society in that age, says that humankind had grown particularly wicked. And in the middle of this wickedness, a man named Noah pleases God. And this is in the middle of Genesis chapter 6. And then we see the reason for the flood. So we're going to focus on Genesis 6, chapter 11. Now the earth was corrupt from God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence, and now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. At least two other Near Eastern religious myths have almost this exact same telling, Epic of Gilgamesh and the Atrahasis. So these tales would have been well known in the culture. So probably the priests who assembled these texts knew they needed to account for these ancient tales that everyone knew. And they're trying to repurpose them, reinterpret them for their own people and make them their own. And the reason that we know that the priests, what's known as the priestly class, has a lot to do with this writing is what comes in the very next verse, which is chapter 6, verse 15, when it gets very specific, that the priest love to put the specificity. So this is how you're to make the ark. 300 cubits, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits. Anytime you get that sort of level of detail, especially when you get to what's called the holiness codes, which you're not supposed to eat or drink or wear, that is the priestly class trying to give legitimacy to the rules that define these people as a separate people. One of the things that is commonly misunderstood, at least according to the liberal Jewish theologians that I'm more fond of reading, is that a lot of these rules that we find in the Genesis and in other places, it's not just about obedience to God. It's about a covenant. We are a relationship. We are the people that do this and the people that don't do that. We're the people that eat this and we don't eat that. Why? Because we want to keep our identity as a separate people. The fear is, if I can worship my God in any way I want, anywhere I want, it will no longer be this religion. The fear is, if I go ahead and just say, all right, give me some baby back ribs, or give me that crab cake, or whatever it is they're not supposed to eat, that, they will no longer understand who they are. And that may or may not be a good thing, but this is the real reason it's in here. It's not just about, you will obey this or I will strike you with a lightning bolt. And that's how I was taught it in Baptist Sunday school. But most Jewish theologians understand covenant as a give and take, as a relationship. And as you'll see, there is a great and rich tradition of negotiating with God, especially in Jewish thought and Jewish writing. So we're going to get to some more of that.
And I think it's not only to preserve the religion, but to preserve, well, you said it, but it's the group's identity.
The group's identity, yeah.
Surrounded by so many other groups.
Yes. Perfect. So if you look at Genesis 7, here's where we start the flood narrative. And at this point, Noah's 600 years old, and he's being asked to build this ridiculous ark and gather all these animals from all over the earth. I'm not sure I could do it, and I'm only 1/10 of his age. But in the 600th year of his life, so this is 7:11. No pun intended. Chapter 7, verse 11. And so what we talk about here is they want to take more of the clean animals, but they take a pair of the animals that are not considered clean. We'll get to the holiness codes in another class. They're in Leviticus. So in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day, once again, the priestly class, very precise. All the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. The rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons that are the ark. Lots of repetition here. And the flood continues, and the waters swell and greatly increase on the earth, and the ark floats on the face of the waters. Just later in chapter 7, the waters swelled so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered, and the waters swelled above those mountains, covering them 15 cubits. All flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, domestic animals, wild animals, swarming creatures, etc., and all human beings. Makes it very clear. Everything on dry land on whose nostril was the breath of life died. Interesting way to conclude that segment. He blotted out every little living thing that was on the face of the ground, human beings and animals and creeping things and birds of the air, and they were blotted out from the earth. And only Noah was left and those that were with him. Okay.
So could I say something? I thought about I tried to raise my hand as instructed, but for some reason it's not working tonight. So anyway,
Hold on for a second, Wendy. You can raise it visually too, just everyone else look, because I won't see it if someone raises on the screen. I'm too busy thinking and talking.
because my little yellow hand doesn't raise my virgin hand. So anyway, so I don't know, I mean, with COVID and everything, but it was definitely before COVID. There was maybe about 2 or 3 years before COVID, there was this absolutely unbelievable exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it was the art of the Israel. Okay, so it had to do with the Assyrians and the Babylonians and so forth. And it was this huge exhibition. I went through it twice, and then in one day, and then I came back another day and saw it because it was just fascinating. And one of the things that really struck me, well, there were 2 things. One is that they had a stone that had David's name on it. It was the first time that there was any indication that there was a King David. But they also had a model of the city of Babylon. And they said that Babylon had been destroyed and it was such a great city, and they compared it to like New York City or Paris. You know, it was this absolutely magnificent city that no one ever thought could be destroyed. And so then they started making up these myths about why it was that Babylon was destroyed. It wasn't like a man-made thing, but rather it was something that came from the gods. And so the whole concept of floods came up, that it was destroyed, that this great city was destroyed by some supernatural force, and that supernatural force came as a flood. So, and I thought, it was like, maybe this is where all of these stories and where Noah got involved. And so that story developed. So anyway, I just thought that was very interesting.
So it does seem that there were a handful of cataclysmic events in the recent past, meaning recent ancient past, recent antiquity, that it seems to have been, floods were very possible, especially in the Tigris-Euphrates area, and where the setting of the Atrahasis and is as well. And so it's very possible a cataclysmic flood of some kind, but there's no way, there doesn't seem to be any evidence of it necessarily being worldwide, but that's an archaeological question that we can't get into.
Right, but the Babylonians, what the exhibition was saying was that the Babylonians were not destroyed by a flood. They were destroyed by the Assyrians or somebody came and destroyed this great place. So when I was looking at this exhibition, I was thinking, well, this is somewhat comparable to, the destruction of the World Trade Center towers, right? That we never thought that this could happen, and that maybe 2,000 years from now, we will mythologize it and say that it came from a non-man-made source, but rather something that was that came about because of a supernatural intervention.
Thanks. Yeah. So let's get back to the text. So the flood subsides, and what happens after the flood subsides?
Well, the part that I
God
never,
changes his mind again. God changes his mind again and says, gee, I'm sorry I did it. I'm making a new covenant and I'm not going to do this again.
Right. Right there is the class. So where is that? Is that in 9:13? Thank you for that. Read that for us, intern Sabrina.
I'll start with 12, because God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my vow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and earth. Me and earth.
So that was 9:12 is where we were just reading from.
Yeah.
9:12. And let's even go earlier in chapter 9, because one of the things we're going to look at right after this is Yahweh's covenant with Abraham. So this is, here's one of the covenants that comes up. And so if you look at 9:8, oh no, let's just go for the beginning of 9.
well, yeah, the big one is
The very
9.
beginning.
Yeah.
And in fact, we go to 8:22. As long as the earth endured, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. I will never again destroy every living creature as I have done, Yahweh says in 9:21. I will never again curse the ground because of humankind, for the inclination of the human heart is evil from you, nor will I ever again destroy every living creature as I have done. So God actually kind of admits a mistake, or and like maybe I overreacted. That's not the God I was taught about in Sunday school, for the record. God did not think twice or ponder and reflect on his moral behavior, especially among us mortals. He was not interested in that. And then there's a whole new covenant about human life at the beginning of chapter 9.
Well, the other thing about
Yes.
Verse 21 or 2 is, I mean, that's the whole basis, or one of the bases for original sin. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth.
Oh, so that's an interesting Hebraic phrase. And
Which
other,
verse is that?
that's verse 21.
Eight.
8:21, and it's spoken of earlier too, in more than one place. And there is the Hebrew word is the Yetzirah hara, which means the evil inclination. And the yeser is the inclination. The interesting thing about it is a lot of late rabbinic scholars will come back and say that we have both the inclination to good and to evil, but we have a hard time picking in the right direction. And so like that's where the Jewish scholars wouldn't say original sin, but that is where the evil sin gets based.
Right.
In addition to the eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right. So now we have the knowledge of good and evil. And so that unlocks our ability to actually choose something other than the good. So we weren't free in the garden until we ate of the fruit. In many ways, we really weren't human until after we ate of the fruit. And so this covenant is made with Noah. Be fruitful. At the beginning of chapter 9. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you shall rest on every animal of the earth and on every bird of the air, on everything that creeps on the ground, and on all the fish of the sea. Into your hand that they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And just as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. For your own lifeblood, I will surely require a reckoning. From every animal, I will require it, and from human beings, each one for the blood of another, I will require a reckoning for human life. Say that again. For every animal, I require it, and human beings. So if you've ever seen in some Judaic law that an animal who kills a person is put to death, that's why. It's part of that covenant. That's where that goes back to. Whoever sheds the blood of a human, by a human shall that person's blood be shed. For in his own image, God made humankind. And again, be fruitful and multiply, right? He's like, you are the only ones left. Get busy. It's time to repopulate the world.
Make up for my mistake.
That's right.
I find that very interesting. That here, this is where God is giving power to man over creatures. Where in the original Genesis 2, he made the creatures to be man's partner. And it's like Adam was dating, this blind date they had on a website, and he finally couldn't find anyone he liked, and God took a rib from him. But they were supposed to be his partners. And here, this is the first time power is given. Also, when the flood came, there was no breath is mentioned constantly, over and over, the breath of life. And it was only the creatures who breathed. The fish weren't destroyed. He wasn't told to fish, and he wasn't told to take fungi or plants, just the ones that walk the earth. And these are the ones that breathe. So I find that breath of life very interesting, and the fact that now that he's wiped out all creatures, it's almost like he's remaking them again, and now you have power over them.
Yes, that's a good thing to notice, because there's something special about the breath. And, Adam's formed by Yahweh taking the dust in his hands and breathing onto it.
Well, wasn't breath also synonymous with spirit?
Spirit. So there's a really interesting etymology in Hebrew. I don't know if you know this, but the same word that is translated as spirit can be translated as breath, and in ancient time can also be throat. So it's very embodied. Ancient Jewish theology is very embodied. There is no disconnect between body and spirit in Hebraic theology. And we can talk about them in different ways, but in the end, they're very much connected. And so a lot of these words can be translated, to include that embodiment, that actuality. It's not just abstract.
And God, I guess himself, God's self breathes. The spirit of God, or a mighty wind over the formless void.
So it repeats the first chapter of Genesis, because this is being written by the priest, and you can see that tight structure from the first chapter of Genesis echoed here. Anytime you see that tight structure, it's the priest making sure you get everything exactly correct. It's not the fable of Adam and Eve or some of these others.
Can I ask about the repetition of the word flesh in so much of what is destroyed in the flood? Like, it seems like God is very upset with the flesh and like everything that has flesh, and that you're talking about the embodiment of the spirit, but there seems to be a contrast there. Is there some etymology in all that?
What do folks think?
Yeah.
I know I'm going back a few chapters here, but it's like.
Well, he says it a lot here too, So what do people think that might mean? Maybe, so let's take a process theology lens on this. Process theology lens, very simply for us tonight, simply means that God is learning and developing and growing as humankind is learning and developing and growing. So maybe God doesn't understand his own creation yet. And one thing that seems to be different from the creation and God is that the creation is flesh. And so what he has created has displeased him. And so, well, maybe there's something wrong with making it out of this kind of clay. Maybe God was considering before having Noah go on the ark and trying to save some of the creation. I'm going to try and create a whole new world. God knows what it will be made of. But I'm not making it out of this again, because look what happened. So, because we don't get so much of that talk of flesh in the rest of the Bible. It's really kind of early on. And so the only way I've ever understood it, John, is that it's God learning to be God. God does not know how to be God in this part of the Bible. We just read it out loud. Oh, sorry, I looked at it left. I'm looking at my notes.
Flesh is the home, the spirit, and breath.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it wasn't understood yet by God or by humanity that flesh is within human beings, where the spirit and the breath reside.
Yeah, and as God is getting a little bit peeved with humans, God says in chapter 6, verse 3, my spirit shall not abide in mortal forever, for they are flesh. Spirit shall not abide in. And then he gets all angry and sorry that he had made like that.
That's
Two
right.
verses down. It's like, no, I botched it.
That's right.
Let's
Yeah.
just start over.
Let's do take two.
It's like a good scientist. All right, well, this is
Okay, this experiment
All
is not what I
right,
expect.
let's jump.
And we'll return
Yeah.
to flesh again next week when we talk about the Exodus, because they'll talk about those strange phrases as they're translated into English about they kept pining for the flesh pots of Egypt.
Well,
After they were away, right? So we'll come back to this. So everyone look into this yourselves and see what you can bring back about flesh next week. But my understanding has always been God does not understand God's own creation yet. And that's why process theology really speaks to me, because it really mirrors the way that all of us develop and learn. So, all right.
yeah,
I do have a question about an earlier time. So I was fascinated as a little girl about, he sent out the raven first, and then he sent out the dove. Never talked about what happened to the raven, except the raven flew around until the water subsided. But then he sent out the dove and came back because the waters hadn't subsided. So I think I'm just wondering what that syncretic tale is there.
So there's 3 birds that are sent out in the Atrahasis, and the Epic of Gilgamesh has some similar method, but I don't think it's 3. So my guess is they knew the Atrahasis, so there better be 3 birds at the end of the story.
So they had to put a nod to it in there.
Yeah, this happens a lot. We'll try to point them out every time they happen, but often, you couldn't have a tale of antiquity without giants and heroes. You couldn't have a tale of antiquity without a garden, because they all knew these stories. You couldn't have a tale of antiquity without the flood. To the people that this was originally written for, not just to us, because they grew up with these stories. That's just their cultural landscape. This happens throughout history. Famously, Virgil. For those of you who Roman history, once Imperial Rome. They want to create a history of where they come from. What do? They borrow the Greek myths,
Right.
Because everybody knew them already. They just gave them different names and changed some of the endings. But that's really Roman mythology is Greek mythology.
And Norse mythology.
And there's some Norse in there too. That's right. By that point, they had a counter. Rand, yes.
We watched some videos this week, and one of them made the point, maybe a tiny bit off topic, but you mentioned before that there are these other Near Eastern traditions or mythologies that have the same tropes, have the floods, have creation stories and everything. But the point that this person made was that so superficially they have these same things, but the big difference here is that this one is talking about men in the center, right? Where some of the other ones do things like they have the gods doing shenanigans.
It's more the tales of the gods and the people.
It's God's doing
Right.
this and God's doing that.
Yeah.
And by the way, the gods got to a point where there was too much work, so they invented humans to be slaves.
That's exactly right. That's what happens in Antrahasis and the Epicures.
Right, so even though they have a lot of the same stroke, this is coming at it from a completely different way by making humans the focus. And God is this creature that's something like a human, or, you know, that he's making humans in his image, whatever that means. So it's much more humanistic. It's much, and humans have this ability to disobey. They have free will, right? So humans have free will, whereas they didn't in the other traditions in general. Right?
Certainly not in the early days. Yeah, in fact, you know, there's funny bits in some of those ancient Near Eastern parallels, and one of them is the gods make people to do all their work, but they can't stand the way people smell. Let's get rid of them. They're like, who's going to do our laundry? You know, it's really.
But here,
Yes.
here the God senses the pleasing smell, right?
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
I thought it was very interesting. I just lost it.
That's okay. No,
It's
it's
9, I think, because feels pleasing smell, and then at some point he decides, maybe it was a smell the pleasing odor. This is 8:20 or 21. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing odor, the Lord said in his heart, he said in his heart, right? I won't do it again.
well, Yahweh loves barbecue.
Yeah.
All right, so in the old part of Genesis, so this is why God smiles on Abel instead of Cain. Abel brings the lamb. Cain brings the product of agriculture, brings grain. Well, that's very nice, but where's that lamb? And God is very sensual and very human and is always hungry. You can get God to do anything so long as you burn the right animal in the right way. It seems in this part of Genesis, right? And this is one of the more human characteristics they give the divine in this telling.
But it isn't just.
I'll have someone talk to John.
So what I had heard about this, and I speak from a wealth of ignorance, is that a deep one, is that the priests made this argument because the priests got to eat the offerings and they wanted them
That's right.
cooked.
That's exactly right.
They're not
That's
going to eat
how the
raw
priests
offerings. What are you
Yeah,
crazy?
there was no pledge campaign. So the way that the priests survived was the offerings that you brought.
Right.
And they would deliberately, the good priests, and when there was bounty, there was some that they wouldn't eat that we leave out for God. But yeah, that is actually a practical reality of that call. Was there someone online who was trying to
Reference to that? What was that reference?
Sorry, Mary?
I couldn't hear her reference, what she was
Oh, it was-
referencing.
8:20, Genesis 8, verse 20.
Thank
And
you.
Fox, have something to say?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All of the gods during that in that area, and even the Greek gods, didn't want the body, they wanted the smell. It's just the way they worked. They couldn't feast on the body, but they could enjoy the aroma.
Well, that's right. The Greek gods are like that. They actually can't taste it. That's why they like to watch the human beings making love and making war, because they really can't do those things.
But the other Mesopotamian cultures stuck to that same concept. The gods feasted on the odor. They didn't feast on the flesh.
Can I say something? Can I join in here? Hi, I just want to say, yeah, if I understand it right, and I'm just that these stories happen when they're put down in present form, happened a long time, obviously a long time ago, and they were myths or stories or what have you. And the priestly class is trying to figure out, well, what is this? God was in control some way. And they want to, can I say? But the important thing was, I think, the covenant. I think is the end is like, I'm going to stick around with you, even, through it all. God says, I'm going to have a covenant. I'm going to stick around with you. We'll work things out in the future, if I see it that way. As a central point. I mean, they're trying to make a point. They're trying to take these stories to make a point about what is God, or who is God. That it's very much a part of the human experience, and I'm going to stick around. And if you say negotiation or what have you, but it's just my.
But he did leave himself an out, because he said, I'm not going to kill anybody. I'm not going to just do this again by flood.
By flood, that's right.
Yeah.
Fire next time. That's
Hold that
that's
thought. Put a
that's
pin in that one.
John Cook, then Foxy, then we're going to move on. Yes.
So I know that everybody enjoys neurophysiology, but we say there are 5 senses. There are actually many more than 5 senses. But if you talk about the 5 senses of like sight, hearing, taste, the oldest one is smell. In fact, it goes directly into the rhinoencephalon. It's a very, in other words, the other senses go to very different places, but the sense of smell goes bang right to the most primitive part of the brain, right? And so that's why it is the most emotionally evocative. Because all of us have had the experience of this odor, and suddenly we're flooded with emotions or memories, and you don't get that from the other senses, right? So there's this sort of primacy, of smell and odor in the way our brains are wired. And I just offer that as maybe one explanation of why is odor so important.
Reverend Scott, could this be to the point of the priest liking the smell, creating the God, changing the God and altering how they perceive God because they like the barbecue?
That's how party.
All right, so I put a question in the chat. This is the question we're going to ask after every one of these episodes. How does God learn, change, grow, or improve? We talked about some of that, but what we're trying to look at is really being able to articulate how God changes in the story. So it's pretty obvious in this one. Who wants to share just how God changes over the course of the story briefly?
First, he likes his creation, then he doesn't like his creation, then he likes his creation again a bit, but he won't destroy it this time. And now he likes meat because the priest say he likes meat.
So,
well, I was gonna say basically what she had said regarding, he wasn't so happy with that, the human 1.0.
Well, when human 1.0 just didn't seem to do it for him.
No. And the Nephilim were somehow, there, and did they go away too? What about
because
them?
they were gone too, because they breathe the air too, right? Or at least the children of the Nephilim.
Yeah. And so, but the other thing about that struck me was that God did select the humans, and he delegated to them that they could select the animals.
That's right.
And so he clearly put them above the animals, but I guess this isn't about how God changed, which he did change his mind. But I wasn't quite sure about why, what the deal was with the unclean animals.
Because we haven't had that teaching yet in the Bible.
And so it's foreshadowing it.
That's right. It's the priestly class. Anytime you see that, that is the priestly class reminding you what the real religion is. Don't you stray from this. And this particular narrative of the Bible is believed to contain most of the sources that compose the Hebrew Bible, the Yahwist tradition, the priestly tradition, the Elohim. All of these are supposedly, they come crashing together in this particular document. Yes.
I just want to add one thing to what Sil said, where last time what struck me the most godlike action that God entrusted Adam with was to name the animal.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Gave us the point, gave us the power, humans the power to name the animals. Yeah, all
And
right.
Scott, do you know if the unicorn was a clean or an unclean animal?
You'd have to ask my niece that question.
I think it was just an unfortunate omission.
It's a good thing they could fly. All right,
Can I,
sure, John, yes.
so what changes
Yes.
in God? I mean, he seems really disgusted with the violence of the flesh.
Uh-huh.
And what seems to change around the time of the covenant is a kind of organization of violence. Like if there is blood spilled, you will spill blood in return.
Uh-huh.
We're now going to have kind of legal structure around our violence. It's not just going to be violence of the flesh. It's going to be violence meted out as justice.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to be the big change. It's not just,
The blood guilt, I mean, this is where this just explains, blood guilt, which you see in so many different human cultures. That, and in many places, in ancient stories and not so ancient, there's a notion that, oh my goodness, we're sorry, but you killed somebody, so you have to die. I mean, there was like no mitigation, or they felt that they had to enact the holy edict whenever a person died. And there's a lot of issues around that, I mean, I think this whole notion, as I think Randy was sharing, is very humanistic with a small h. It's very human centered. And, there doesn't seem to really be anything wrong with that until you start to ponder ramifications for what does it mean to say that we are interdependent and part of a larger web of existence? And maybe are we really at the crown of creation, or we just think we are because that's who we are, and we can do all these magical things with our brains and our hands. And I'm not going to pretend I can answer that question, but I think that's the question that gets raised. And so, how do we think of ourselves in a larger context? And it was interesting to me reading Pope Francis's about the natural world, about his climate emergency letter. He speaks of all of creation having worth and dignity, not just human beings. And so I think that is a still yet to be digested change in core Catholic theology. All right. Deep breath. Yes.
Sorry, I just want to throw something silly out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll stop after that. Could everything we've read so far, the 7 days, he worked so hard, day and night, and then he took the seventh day off to rest. There's a whole flood story where he decides that maybe what he's built so far isn't the right thing, and he's gonna destroy that and build something else. Couldn't this be a description of a programmer building a simulation? Right?
Oh, yeah.
Programming something that is viewable as a simulation. He's built in his image.
So it's Yahweh's sim earth.
Yeah.
If you remember that whole
Yeah.
game. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sure, there's nothing wrong with seeing it that way, symbolically.
It's just a different way to think about it.
No. Another possibility is, this God doesn't know what, whether to fish or he's or swim. And I just see it as man's way of saying, the world seems incredibly disordered. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's terrifying.
That's right.
It's terrifying. So a good way of thinking about this is not because of us. It's because the guy who made us can't figure out what he's doing. And that's why the world's so incredibly dangerous and disordered. And he's going to stumble along, and so we've just got to ride it out, while whatever name you want to call him, figures out, how to fly fish or whatever he's got to do to figure it out. And so that's one way of, in other words, I think all of these things are people trying to explain the horrible things in life. Trying to come up with stories to explain why life is so difficult. And I think that's a possibility.
And that's not to say that they don't necessarily believe them to be true. right? When they're composing these stories, I have no reason to question their belief or their faith. That doesn't mean we have to accept it, at face value. So I want to share this little brief thing. This is from a fun text called The Introduction to the Hebrew Bible by John Collins. And he taught for a long time at Yale, long since expired. And what I love about this, he has a little section in here about the sons of God, this whole Nephilim thing. And what he says about it is the episode of the sons of God seems to be a fragment of a polytheistic myth. I was talking about that earlier, how all the surrounding cultural myths come crashing into this narrative, right? And like many of the stories, it explains the origin of the Nephilim. The actual Hebrew translation for that means the fallen ones. So they're not just the sons of God, but somehow they are not wherever God is at the moment, and they don't seem to be allowed to be. The heroes of old, and the Greek and Latin versions, the Nephilim are rendered as giants, and which is really felt to be more of a Greek intrusion into the myth. But this was also, it must have been something that was current in ancient Israel and part of their cultural account of the primeval history of the world. So just, these things just end up in here. And so there are times when some of these get developed into full-fledged myths beyond that, but I don't need to go into all of that. Some of the Apocrypha actually developed this. The book of Enoch famously develops the sons of God in detail. Maybe one day of class in Apocrypha, but first we got to know what this is.
Question.
And still, yeah.
Could you comment on the use of the number 7? You just mentioned Enoch, and he was the 7th generation. There's just a whole lot of 7s going on. 7 days, 7 nights, 7.
There was a lot of belief in magic numbers.
And I was wondering if that was a left holdover from the magic.
7, 43, those are all known to be magical. 12 has some magic to it as well. Later, not so much in the earlier collectors, and which is why they think there's 12 disciples for
Right.
Jesus by the time we get to the Christian scriptures. But there was a great belief in numbers, which was amplified and encouraged by Greek thought and the thought of Pythagoras as well. Right? So all these things are floating around in the culture, despite the fact that this is in many ways a set of desert farmers, many of them nomadic, not all of them. We have a tendency to think of them, or I had a tendency of thinking of them growing up, the way I was taught, that they were sort of backwards, and that made them less prone to worldly things. That's not the way ancient Israel was. It was a crossroads. People were always, especially in the towns and the cities, people from places they had never heard of were coming through all the time. It was a crossroads of trade and therefore of culture. And so if you controlled Israel, you control a lot of the spice and other delivery routes for all kinds of things. And so they're very much a worldly people, especially the people who write these stories. But people love a good story, so people in the end don't really care where the story comes from if the story sounds good. So they're more than willing to adapt it and use it in their own. Anything before we move to Abraham?
Just jump in here. Just when I get an impression that the priestly class is trying to solidify their power. They're in charge. God's in charge, and there are these other godly like people, but they're not really God. We know who God is. At the top of it all. I get that impression that power, it seems to be an issue through it all. We're going to work with these stories, and in the end, we're powerful because God comes out, and we know who God is.
And God favors us, and God makes a covenant with us, and God makes promises to us. Yeah, all that is definitely part of this. This is a time when the notion of a separation between church and state was not really much of a concept, and so the idea that I had to pay attention to a king and maybe send my sons to his army and to give him taxes, that king better have been made king by something beyond just the king's desire to be king. It better be divinely sanctioned. This is where the divine right of kingship gets born. There was no way you would pay attention to someone unless you felt somehow that it was the will of the gods. All right, let's move on. Genesis chapter 12, we'll give you a chance to get there. And this is the call of Abram. He is not Abraham yet. We see this is not uncommon in scripture, that those who have been called by the divine have a new name. And this happens a lot in Genesis. So it's Abram and Sarai, and then Abraham. The AH is added, which is often something that's added to divine names. Elah, E-L-A-H is one of the terms for the divine. And hallelujah, the Yah at the end it means praise God. So hallelujah, praise God. And so to add that is a sense of being marked by the divine. It's just the simple adding of the A and the H as we read it in English to Abram's name to make it Abraham is what changes here. But first, there's all these interesting stories of Abraham. Is fascinating, and we could do 15 weeks on Abraham, but we're not. So here is what Abram is told in chapter 12. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house, the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you, I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. This is very universalist. In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed, not just your progeny. This gets changed over time. So Abram went as the Lord told him, and Lot is his brother, goes with him. And Abram at this time is 75 years old. And he takes Sarai, and there's all these great stories of Abram going around, and it's a weird custom that we don't understand. He keeps saying that his wife is his sister, because apparently in some of the traditions of the ancient Near East, if you kill me, you get my wife as your prize, but it's not the same with my sister. It's sort of buried in antiquity, but that seems to be the scholars' best guesses. It's not just that Abraham's trying to be, offering up his wife to whomever, but he keeps saying that it's your sister, because if someone is of ill intent, they can simply kill him and take his wife. And so until he knows that he can trust them, oh, this is my sister. This happens like more than once. It's really fun. So God makes a covenant with Abram. It's still Abram again in chapter 15. And it's very similar.
We going to 15 now?
We're going to chapter. Yeah. I'm scanning. So we're going to end up at 18. So if that helps you out. And so we do it again. And this is where he says, "So shall your descendants be." This man, no one but your very own issue shall be your heir. And this is where it becomes more specific, just about Abram's bloodline. But we read the first covenant. All the families of the earth shall be blessed because of this agreement I'm making with you. And we're left to figure it out. So then the birth of Ishmael. Now, Ishmael, we'll spend some time perhaps on this story at another class. Wendy, I might want to ask you for that because I know you were part of that other class we did on reading the women of the Bible. And Abram's wife has an Egyptian slave girl. And at this point in Sarai's life, Sarai is not able to give birth, to conceive, I should say. And so, which was common in those days, the ladies in waiting of your wife could bear your children, and they could be your heirs, if you so decreed it. And so he's like, well, gosh, if I'm supposed to be the founder of this great nation, I'm 75 years old and I haven't had any children yet. So he doesn't quite understand. So he has a child with Hagar, the Egyptian slave girl, who is Sarai's sort of chief handmaiden, until, of course, Sarai sees the how strong and smart and attractive Ishmael is, and she begins to get jealous, especially once she has her own son. But we're going to go now to chapter 18. All right. And we'll go a little slower now. Sorry for those of you who have a hard time with my surfing through Genesis. And there's just so much here. So we're just going to focus on this early part of chapter 18. So where are they? They're on one of Abram's vast holdings. Well, he's Abraham now. He became Abraham in chapter 17. He becomes Abraham. And Sarai becomes Sarah. So you don't get confused with the names. They're the same people. Abraham is Abram and Sarah is Sarai. And they're at what's known as the tent of meeting, which is the main tent where like the head of the household would be. And Abraham has a notion that some messengers from God are going to come. And so he sits himself near the entrance to the tent of meeting. This is significant because that is the most vulnerable place inside. It is unusual that the patriarch of his wealth and stature would have had a servant at the door, a butler. But because he's expecting a special visitors, he's there. This is sort of the basis of some of the radical hospitality that's often spoke about from these cultures. It's not one of my, I'm going to be the one to greet you. I'm going to be the one to sit you down. I'm going to be the one to make sure you get served, even if it's by my own hand, all these things. So let's just listen and hear what happens according to the text. So the Lord appears to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. Mamre is a certain part of his land holdings, which was believed to have special significance. And as Abraham, sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, he looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that, you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." And so they say, "Do as you've said." In other words, give me something to sit on, something to eat, something to drink. And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and asked Sarah to make ready quickly 3 measures of flour, knead it, make cakes. Abraham runs to the herd himself, takes a calf. This is very unusual for a patriarch of a wealthy landholding. Takes a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. And they said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." And then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall bear a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him, wondering why the old man is running around for these 3 strangers, probably. And Sarah's listening, and Abram and Sarah were old. They were advanced in age. You see, he's in his 90s, the last time they named his age before we get here. And Sarah's about the same age. And it had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I've grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" In other words, have a child. And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child? Is anything?" And then, of course, he asks, rhetorically, "Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? And at the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah denies laugh. "I didn't laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "Oh yeah, you laughed." And of course, they name their son Isaac, which in Hebrew means Sarah laughed. So that's where his name comes from. That's one of the meanings of the name Isaac. And so what on earth is all this?
They wasted a lot of time on Sarah, or spent a lot of time on Sarah laughing and being doubtful.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bit of
Spent a
that,
lot of
but-
verses on that.
But wouldn't that resonate with like contemporary readers even from their time? You know, what, I'm in my 90s, I'm supposed to believe that this character is going to have a child, you know? It's fascinating. Yes.
It says the Lord appeared to Abraham, but then it says that he looked up and saw 3 men. Is the Lord supposed to be one of?
So this is one, very good for picking that up. This is one of the very few times that folks who are trying to defend the scriptural source for the Trinity will say this. But none of these 3 men are actually the divine, and we're going to get to that part. So then the men set out and they looked towards Sodom, and this is where they realize that the Lord is going to do something to this wicked city. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? So Lord is different from the men. So he's talking to the men. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. And then he says, no, for I've chosen him that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness, etc. And then the Lord said, how great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how grave their sin. I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that's come to me. So here's all kinds of things. First, is God at all omniscient in this story?
No, not at all.
No, he has no idea what he's got to actually go physically, it seems like, in the literal words of the story, to Sodom and see for himself. This is actually, I've heard the rumor. I heard the rumor. But he's going to. So this is not the God I was taught about in Sunday school. God would just know these things. Yeah. And so God is very embodied, has to go somewhere and to find out for God's self. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. And this is the first, I believe it's the first great negotiation in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Because remember, you may not know this, his brother Lot lives in Sodom. Yes, Sodom is somebody else. So Abraham comes, well, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within that city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? He's just made this agreement that, you know, Abraham's going to be the father of everything that's awesome and great and in perpetuity. And now he's arguing. That is not the God I was taught about in Sunday school.
Well, he was even worried about telling him that.
And he
didn't. Should I tell him?
Yo, should I tell him? He's gonna chew my ear off. I know this guy. Yeah, and the Lord says, well, if I find at Sodom, what was that? I'm sorry.
No, it just, God is doubting whether or not, like, that doesn't seem very decisive,
It's
right?
not omnipotent, it's not omniscient. Yeah. So I'm now in 1826. If I find at Sodom 50 righteous, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And then Abraham thinks to himself, well, that was easy. Well, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, who am but dust. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And it keeps going, it keeps whittling them down. You know, for the sake of, by the time you get to the end, you know, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went on his way. When he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So, of course, we hear the story, the depravity of Sodom, and we won't get into this because this isn't really a God changing God's mind thing. But in effect, this is a story of rape and treating people as only an object for the gratification of sexual desire, even against their will. That's what Sodom and Gomorrah are about, in my estimation. This is not about any particular type of sexuality, because violence, because rape is not sexuality, it's violence. Let's just put that aside. And move on. Then we go to 22. So God does, so what happens in Sodom and Gomorrah, God destroys them, but he tells Lot and Lot's family to get out. And of course, Lot's wife turns around. And if you've ever been to that part of Palestine and Israel over by the Jordan through the desert, there are these salt pillars. So that may be one of those etiologies, a story to explain something that exists around here. Because there are these things that if you see them in the distance, they look like there could be people standing. So there's actually are pillars of salt in the desert. And so it's an interesting little tale. And there seems to have been some kind of catastrophe in the Near East where a city or two was destroyed by something. And maybe it was a meteor, but who knows? But there seems to be some evidence, geologic as well as archaeological.
Meteor strike is what most of the scientists are agreeing on at this point.
What was that? What's the meteor strike? Yeah. Thank you for that, Foxy. And so we get to the birth of Isaac. And so this is at the top of 21. So Genesis 21. And the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and did for Sarah as he had promised. And they have a son. And they've waited so long, 100 years for this son. Practically, right? And it is cherished, and Sarah gets really jealous of Hagar and Ishmael, and they get sent away. That's a whole other story that we may come back to. But what we're going to focus on for the rest of tonight is the command to sacrifice Isaac, which is one of the most disturbing things in this part of the Bible by my estimation. You may feel differently. So I'm just going to read from the beginning of chapter 22. After these things, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, and Abraham says, here I am. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall show you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering, set out, went to the place in the distance that God had shown him. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place far away. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. So he's not traveling alone. It's not just him and Isaac. And obviously he doesn't want the men to see what he's about to do. Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We will worship and then we'll come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on his son Isaac. He himself carried the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father. And he said, here I am, my son. Fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, God himself will provide the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So the two of them walked on together. When they came to the place God had shown, Abraham built an altar, laid the wood in order. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to kill his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here I am. He said, do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mountain of the Lord which shall be provided. And there's some pronouncements after that. I just want to stop here and invite you all to share with me what you think, what you feel, what your response is to this particular classic tale.
Just that he put the wood on Isaac's shoulders. which was reminiscent to me of the New Testament of Christ carrying his own cross.
And,
Which
I'm
I'm
sure.
wondering, yeah, I'm wondering if they took that from here.
Yep. And it's wood too. Yep. What else? What kind of Abraham is this? What does he not do here that he just did?
He didn't negotiate.
Where's the negotiator?
Yeah.
He doesn't say a blessed thing. Okay.
It's fine. I'm just gonna bring him up there and get rid of him.
Yeah.
No questions asked.
Yeah, and so like when being told that God's about to destroy a city, yes, his brother lives there, but maybe he can tell his brother and his brother get uptight. But most of the people he doesn't even know, he like negotiates to keep it from happening. But his own son, no question. Why? Tell me, somebody explain this to me. It's out of it.
I just wonder if there was a lot of child sacrifice there. And I was taught in terms of this story that that this was a story to instruct the Jews that child sacrifice wasn't a good thing and to stop it. So, you know.
It's not your Bible class, Wendy.
Pardon?
This is not your first Bible class, is it?
Right,
Yes.
yes. So I'm wondering if that's, that this was more of an instructional thing of just, telling the Hebrews, this is how we want you to behave.
So, yes. So from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem could be seen a valley called Gehenna, whose translation is where we get the word hell from. And in ancient times, that is where human sacrifices were done. The Temple Mount has been thought as a holy place for a very long time, well before the Israelites. And the tales of burning and torment are believed to have been left over from the times of human sacrifice, when you could see the smoke and you could smell the burning flesh if you lived in Jerusalem from the valley of Gehenna. And in very, as far as its operation to the people this book was intended for, it was supposed to admit, because people would know this from the cultural tales that they heard growing up, that we used to have human sacrifice. Over there. And in fact, it was right there. and so if you don't account for the stories and truth that people know, they're not going to believe what you want them to believe in the rest of the text. And so your whole project is compromised. So you can't leave any of that detail out.
But this also shows, that's really interesting. That also shows sort of a different thought, right?
Yes.
This is a cruel God. He's outside of the notions of good and evil. This is evil. He's not a moral being, right?
This is an amoral act by a supposed moral deity.
And
Yes.
forget the arguing over, are 50 righteous enough?
That's right.
Righteous enough? Where's the line where we have enough righteous, right?
That's right.
But to tempt the father into killing, into taking his son's life, this is beyond pale, no pun intended.
And God changes God's mind, right?
And
Does he?
Does God change? Does God know all?
Was this a setup? Or was this a setup?
But it could be that God wanted to, so in terms of the myth,
Yes.
this just the fact that Isaac stays alive justified that you shouldn't do human sacrifice. Like that's in the myth. But like I think that the fickleness, it's like, oh no, wait, no, I don't want the, like, how's he gonna populate the earth if Isaac just dies? Like, yeah. So those are the two things, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody, either there's a play or somebody wrote a story from the point of view of Isaac as he's walking up, and what must he be thinking, and after, how are they feeling, father and son, about each other. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
Isaac.
I'm not so into this outdoorsy streak. in here,
Yeah,
so-
it's like, I'm thinking about that.
John Cook, did you have a comment earlier? And let's have John Carlton and John Cook.
So to me, it's incredibly the worst thing about the Bible and religion in general is the story. And I'm always eager to hear positive spins on it. But to me, it is also Abraham is complicit, sort of. You promised me a sweet gig. I'm willing to kill my son.
That's quite a turn on old Abe.
And the irony of it is, he's sort of saying, the power structure is what you want to believe in, not family. And ironically, I mean, that's sort of what the atheist communists sort of put out the last 100 years at the same time. So the religious and the atheist communists sort of come together at this point.
Very fascinating.
What was that again?
He said that the atheists were suggesting you needed to leave your family and find a new group, meaning, us or the communists. The collective is more important than your birth family. Anyway, John.
There's always an interesting question. Do the people own the state or does the state own the people? But that was inside. But there are, again, I'm not a scholar about this or about anything, frankly. But there are many places in the Bible where God just flails on somebody brutally.
Yeah.
And like Job. What was that? What was that? What was
That's Joe. What kinds of time with Joe?
No, I'm not saying let's
Bring
jump.
your handkerchief.
I'm not saying let's
Maybe some
jump.
bandages.
Yeah.
I'm not saying let's jump to Job. I'm just saying, and it's not just Job. I mean, look what was done to Jesus. This is not an amusing God. He puts people through brutal things. To test their faith. And so I would just argue he's kind of insecure. Because people, he wants people to go right to the edge, and you go okay, I guess you do. Okay, I guess I am important. I guess you do think I'm important because you're willing to go that far. So
God needs anger management.
Right.
and he's also very insecure.
He's very insecure. They know it's not going to love me. Oh my gosh, you're going to worship me over there instead of over here. He gets upset about that all the time.
Look how many of the commandments are about how you have to adore God.
That's right. He's terrified you might put your adoration
all these.
Well, it's the first one.
Yeah, if you
Oh, God,
really
before
if you really want to wail on God, the extermination of the Canaanites, the book of Joshua, which is a deep cut, admittedly, but again, one of the most violent.
The Shechemites too.
Yeah.
The Shechemites too.
Yeah, just the Israelites get to the promised land and then they start killing everybody because God called them.
Yeah.
And he's okay. God's okay with that.
Lauren.
Not a biblical scholar or even a reader. So I don't know if the context could ever support this fairy tale. But if God is testing Abraham's faith, and Abraham's faith is overwhelming, that he trusts God, and Isaac says, "Where's the lamb?" And Abraham says, "God himself will provide the lamb. I trust this guy." And sure enough, he does.
So is Abraham just clueless and gets the thing wrong all along?
No, I'm asking whether you could
Yes.
possibly interpret this as
Many people do.
Abraham knows that God's not.
Or the lamb could be Isaac. Right? I mean, he didn't want to scare his son and go, "You're the one I'm sacrificing." I'm not sacrificing a lamb. I'm so symbolically, at least in the New Testament, the Christian Bible, that the lamb is symbolically Jesus Christ.
Also, he ends up sacrificing a ram, not a lamb.
He sacrifices a ram. Yes, right. Not a lamb. That's right.
There was, if I may, there
Yes,
was
please.
one thing when I was a kid and read this, I too was horrified. And I wondered, what was Isaac doing when he was tied up? He's like I don't like the direction. This is taking an ugly turn. Very ugly turn.
I
But
know
what-
the trauma of that.
Well, yeah.
And
we
Isaac,
stuttered.
actually isn't fleshed out much in the
Yeah.
rest of Genesis. We get a lot about Jacob, who is Isaac's son, but Isaac's, he's not really very colorful like some of the other patriarchs. There's not much about him except giving birth to Jacob and Esau.
Well, there is something, there was another point that I was gonna make. That was the lead into it. That as a child, that's what I thought. But now as I've understood about human sacrifice, that was often considered a privilege. To be the one that was sacrificed.
Oh, that deeply embedded in those cultures.
Deeply embedded in the cultures is that it would be someone who had a lot to lose. That's why the sacrifice was even more meaningful.
Well, and so like some of the ancient cults in like Crete, for instance, you know, there's belief that the Crete was ruled by women. The women had the royalty, and a queen could choose as her favorite for a year a man of her liking, and he would be treated as a god until it was time to kill him so the harvest would be good. And he knew this going into it, so it was still considered a piece of honor. So there was that in ancient times, that to be the sacrificed was a bit of honor.
But I'm wondering if he actually didn't stay Abraham's hand, if God might have been a little worried about what Sarah would say to him. She already laughed at him.
That's right.
She already laughed at him.
That's right. That's an interesting take, and I just think that, you know, I think the easiest way is what Wendy and I were talking about, that this was something that had to be put in there to account for why we don't sacrifice people, because when you get into the book of Leviticus, they sacrifice just about everything else in the ancient cult, you know, and they're still doing it in a very similar way, but this is not people. And it's meant to be a bit of cultural evolution, some people will say. But, you know, the actual God that's in here, you know, again, he doesn't know everything. He doesn't, you know, he has to change. See Mog. All right, it's 8:45. And we're going to just take a moment for any last observations or questions or concerns.
Can I just flesh out one thing I said earlier about smell? The vast majority of taste is smell. So really taste and smell, they're like that, right? And you know, just think of what powerful forces these are for human existence. Yeah, just want to add that.
Thanks for saying that while I'm hungry. I haven't had any dinner. So I'm going to read. So the philosopher Kierkegaard really had a hard time with this episode and ended up writing about it. I'll include a link to this. I'm just going to share a little bit about what he writes, and some of the language is, you know, I tried to pick a passage that isn't too full of theological jargon. So here we go. Just as the infant, though it does not sin, because it is not as such yet conscious of its existence, yet its existence is sin. This is Kierkegaard's claim, as seen in the idea, and the ethical makes its demand upon it every instant. If one denies that this form can be repeated in the adult in such a way that it is not sin, then the sentence of condemnation is pronounced upon Abraham. How then did Abraham exist? He believed. So Kierkegaard tries to take this straight to like conventional Christian theology, that I just have to accept this on faith, that this story happened this way, and that Abraham is saved because he believed. But he kind of gets it more, he mixes it up. He says faith is the paradox that the individual as the particular is higher than the universal. is justified over against the universal and is not subordinate but superior to the universal. Yet in such a way, it is the particular individual after he has been subordinated through the universal becomes more themselves for the fact. So in other words, Kierkegaard can't explain it, and he uses like circular jargon. You'll see this when you read it. It's almost impossible to make anything out of.
He's Danish too, so.
Also, he's drinking heavily clearly when he wrote.
Yeah.
Well,
Most black.
The Danes are weird.
And
Just black.
so,
The universal is, hello?
yeah, so in other words, you know, the supposed greatest thinkers of all time couldn't figure out what to say about this.
Because everyone was so horrified. How could you say anything coherent? Why don't the great thinkers just go like, you know, this is a dreadful story. Can we go to a movie?
When I read some of the stuff online that he wrote, he was trying to he was making a story and symbolizing each part and equating it to weaning a child.
Right. Yeah,
And
he was.
There is no way my head could get around weaning a child is the same as killing your kid.
Right, right. And so he goes to the process theology explanation that God still has not learned how to be a good God. God is still learning how to be a good God. Abraham's still learning how to be a good father and how to be a good follower of the divine. They haven't figured this out yet. So it's just the story of our imperfection. This is why we do. I almost started talking like construction worker. Well, that's why we do stupid stuff. They're trying to explain that too, you know, like otherwise seemingly a good person, why would he do something ridiculous like that?
Is it also possible that these were much more violent times than we?
It absolutely was horrendously violent.
I think you know, I mean,
the death rate now compared to back then is trivial.
It's trivial.
Yeah.
I mean, the slaughter. It's. I mean, in fact, the death rate since we have electricity has been plunging. Because back in the old days, it was you didn't know who was out there.
That's right.
People and murder was rampant.
Thank you for reminding everyone how important electricity is.
But I'm saying, would you want to, if there were no electricity, would everybody feel comfortable right now just going out into the absolute dark?
Go to bed at like 6:15 when I mean, you know, they would go to bed really early because they didn't have artificial light. That's why they used to get up so blessedly early. If you were a farmer, you know, I mean, you work your tail off, you're exhausted, and the sun sets by 5:40, and you know, all those things are true, and other things are true too. But you guys are great theologians, and you continue to prove it. And we're looking forward to next week. Next week we will be going to Jacob wrestling with the angel. Which is a wonderful and colorful story, and then we're going to dig into the Exodus. And so that's simply the first half of the book of Exodus. Exodus is one of the longest books of the Bible. So, and we're going to be asking questions about what do we do with Pharaoh, and why does nobody believe Moses, and what is all this with the hardening of hearts? You might have heard me preach about that a couple of weeks ago. And so that's where we'll go next week. The Exodus is long and rich. My guess is we won't get much beyond Jacob and the Exodus next week, and that's fine because any of these things we could just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper into just one chapter of one of these books. I actually took a graduate level course once on just Genesis 1 through 11 for the entire term.
Yeah.
And you know, and we still felt like we had a lot more to learn at the end of that. That was Tikva Primer-Kinsky. Some of you may have heard me speak of her taking my other classes. She's the one who wrote the book, Reading the Women of the Bible, that I taught from. And Tikva Primer-Kinsky. Yep. And you know, I'll never forget her. We were her last class before she died.
Wow.
She had an aggressive form of cancer. She literally taught our last 4 classes. We met in her office at the University of Chicago. and she was lecturing from her hospital bed to a spider phone. We didn't have Zoom then. And every now and then she would nod off and we would say, "Oh, nurse," and the nurse would tap her and she would pick up right where you left off. And her husband was so grateful because we asked her husband, like, we feel like we're not helping her. And you're like, you have no idea. The fact that she has to teach you guys next week is what's keeping her alive. So long as she dials in, please keep coming to class. He was his urging, and he treated us all to a really fabulous feast after she died. So that was it. So anyway, so I have a deep connection to this from that experience, especially with Genesis. But looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. Don't forget about your writing assignment. Start thinking about that. Some go-getter, high achiever, teacher's pet has already sent me a draft of something. Of course. I won't say who it is. But anyway, there you go. And love you all real good, as we say in Baltimore. And I'll see you next week.
Thanks, hon.
Good night. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Fox.